Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today I'm talking to Lisa Suennen. She's the managing partner of Venture Valkyrie. Lisa, thanks for joining me today.
Delighted to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know there are some people that will be listening that will know you well, but there are clearly some folks that don't know everything about your impressive history and your path to where you are currently. So share a little bit of your background, if you would.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I've spent the last 20 years primarily being a venture capitalist investing in young healthcare companies, which has been really fun. Mostly that's been around health IT, health services, and medical devices. Before that, I was an entrepreneur. I helped build a behavioral health company that became quite successful and served people with mental health and substance abuse challenges. Did that for 9 years. I also write a blog called Venture Valkyrie, and or you might call it Venture Valkyrie, and I hosted a podcast myself called Tectonics, which is found on iTunes, and I spend some of my time teaching at Berkeley in the business school as well. So I really have spent the last 30 years in and around healthcare from lots of different angles.
So going back to the mental health, I mean, it's contextual to what's going on now with the opioid crisis, and but it sounds like that was some time ago, which is a little bit distressing because it seems as if you made some progress, but we haven't made any progress if we look at the opioid crisis right now.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's very back to the future for me right now. I was working in the behavioral health and substance abuse world from 1989 to 1998. We covered 35 million people in our program. It was kind of a hybrid of an insurance company and a provider organization and a PPO and a lot of other things. But basically, much of the service we provide was under fully capitated programs, so the value-based model that we are talking about today, provided all over the country. It's pre-internet, so most of it was provided the old-fashioned way through counseling and inpatient and intensive outpatient, all sorts of programs. Opioids weren't really a problem back then. There was other drugs that were the bigger problems back then. I find it fascinating that since I left that field, the desire to innovate in it went away for a pretty long time. So after our company was sold and there was some other transactions in that industry, there was almost no innovation that anybody talked about in behavioral health up until the last few years. Over the last few years, most of the innovation that's been worked on up until really the last year or two has been around what I would call the worried well, or the people with mild to moderate anxiety and depression, and helping people in the workplace deal with their challenges and all of which is very important. But frankly, we haven't made a lot of progress on substance abuse and how to treat it better. Opioids are the new thing, right? And unfortunately really horrible, and are sort of a fast track to heroin and other deadly drugs. And I'm just kind of shocked by how much I think we've actually gone backwards, not forwards, in the behavioral health side. And I think, unless people in power in the healthcare industry really decide to commit to this and believe that these issues are as important to health as any other aspects of health, which is not a widely held belief, by the way,
Right.
It won't change. It won't change. And it is important. And, I don't know what it's going to take. I do feel as though we've gone backwards quite a bit and are beginning to go forwards again. But it's really just so focused on the opioid crisis. And frankly, the issue is much, much bigger than that.
So it's interesting you say that. Well, I think back to my era, going back 20 plus years and implementing an EHR, and we had all these fantastic lessons. And here I am 20 plus years on, and all of those lessons still apply. That's very distressing to me, and it is particularly with the opioid crisis because it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer to that is. I think you're right. It needs that sort of top-down investment and focus and an acceptance of, this is it's a clinical problem. It's not this isn't deviant behavior as such. Nobody
Well,
gets up in the morning and going, I want to be an addict. I want to be, suffering from it. It's tragic.
Well, I think the opioid crisis is particularly poignant because it mostly starts because doctors give patients, painkillers for various conditions, and it causes addiction so quickly and with such, with among such quote unquote otherwise regular people. And I think it really highlights how this is a medical problem, not deviant behavior, as you say. This is truly a medical issue. It needs medication-assisted treatment. It needs therapy. It needs payment. It needs access, and it needs to not be treated like, it's for those bad people over there, or those poor people over there, or the whatever, way we marginalize people with behavioral health problems. Again, the opioid crisis is very in the news, but if you look at people with, serious mental illness of all types, look at the high suicide rates in the country, we really don't take care of those people very well. And we marginalize people with mental health conditions, and still now, all these many years later, the stigma associated with these conditions remains so high. And I just find it so sad because most people I know, and I don't think I know unusual people, deal with mental health problems either themselves or in their family at one time or another. And so given how common it is, probably more common than heart disease, we should be more thoughtful about how it's integrated into the health system.
Couldn't agree more. I watched the closure of an 1,100-bed psychiatric unit in London when I was working there, and essentially all the patients were turfed out into the streets.
San Francisco is a case in point. Same thing.
Same thing happening worldwide. It's a tragedy.
Yeah.
So getting back to that, so you went through the mental health and behavioral company, but you got into venture capital, and it's I'm sure it's not lost on you, but that's not something that women are notoriously present in as a career. How did that happen, and how did that work for you? What was it like?
Well, I think for me, as with most of the women that I know, how I got into it was helping start a fund. It's a very interesting problem. So when I first started in venture, there were about 8% of partners were women. And if you go look around now, it's about the same. Hasn't really improved much 20 years later. Maybe we're up to 9, maybe in somebody's wildest dreams, 10. I am encouraged right now. I'm seeing a multitude of women start their own firms, say just, screw it, this isn't going to get fixed by itself. And I hope that will spawn a much more diverse crop of people over the next 10 years as those firms evolve and hire and, proliferate. Funds do turn over. A lot of the older funds that were very important when I first started in venture no longer even exist, and there's new firms that step into their place. So hopefully the natural cycle of that will continue to evolve in a more diverse direction.
So let me try and tease out if you can come up with anything. But if you were looking at this now, at this point in time, casting your mind back to the point that you stepped in, is there anything that you would tell your past self or people currently trying to step into this career that could help, specifically, stepping into what I have to say that's shocking that it's 8% 20 years later. That's a tragedy. What is it? What can we do? How do we approach this? How do we rectify this?
Well, I think it's, depends on who the stakeholder you're talking about is. I think if you're an investor in venture funds and you believe in diversity, that's important to a better outcome. Because, by the way, there's a multitude of research that shows that gender diverse companies have better financial outcomes. A multitude of research, so much research that it's ridiculous. There's more research being done on it. Better profits, better return on equity, all of the things that if you're a venture capitalist, you should be excited about. So I think, and if you're an investor in venture funds, you should be very keen on because, you're looking for returns. you can improve your returns by diversity, you should be demanding that the funds you invest in have diverse partnerships. That should be the number one thing. The buyer, it's always follow the money, and the money starts with limited partners investing in venture funds. Some of the limited partners have made this a priority, and many have not. But I think it should be more widespread. And not because it's nice, because it's financially profitable, which is the reason to do it all across the board. I mean, nice is great, but in the venture world, and nice don't go together a lot. So it's all about the money, right? I think at the partnership level, I think people are foolish if they don't think about this. That again, the research is very compelling that shows that diverse investments, companies that have diverse boards and diverse management teams do better. I think for venture funds who have no women in the partnership, they should be looking for women entrepreneurs to back. And if they don't feel comfortable dealing with people like that, they should be thinking about expanding their partnerships, because if that makes a more profitable company, then they're better. I really think that it's a very clubby world, and it's a very like who you know world. Nobody's advertising for these jobs. They're networked through who you know. And that leads to a lot of, behavior that it's not always intentional, but it's who you know, and who you know may look just like you is more common than not. So I think people have to be deliberate about it. I think that women need to start funds. I think that programs that support women entrepreneurs are great and important, but they can't be cute. They have to be really financially rigorous and demonstrate that women are equally effective. And in fact, for those of you who watch Shark Tank, the guy they call Mr. Wonderful, he's always talking about how the companies he's backed that are led by women have been far more financially successful than the others. So I think, it's not really a question anymore. It's really a question of execution. And that requires will. I think for the women who enter the field, you can't be on the defensive. If you got in, great, go on the offensive. Be who you are, be assertive, be confident about it. Don't question yourself. Don't defer. Just be who you are. And I think that's not just in venture capital. I think it's women executives everywhere need to give themselves a break and act in accordance with their natural tendencies, and not or overcome the natural tendencies, I think, to defer to traditional power models, and which is women do it all the time. And so we have a role to play as well in fixing the problem.
So as you think back to your sort of steps through this career, you've had lots of, different roles. Were there any learning points that you had, anything that really sort of made a huge difference, a positive difference to your experiences, the companies that you were involved in, people, processes? Was there anything that really stood out to you that you go, gosh, that really made a big difference in my world?
Boy, many things are flashing through my mind right now. A couple later, I had a boss early in my career who forced me to be good at public speaking, or be comfortable with it anyway, which thank God for that, because that is truly important in any kind of leadership role. And it used to scare the living hell out of me, as it scares many people. And he forced me to confront it, much against my will, which I'm grateful for. I had a colleague who really encouraged me to think about personal branding along the way, to start using my writing skills to my benefit, and to be thinking about how to build a brand for myself, not just for where I worked. And that has been incredibly valuable to me over the years, and brought me more opportunity than I ever anticipated. I think about a couple companies I've been involved in where I just learned so much, and it opened up a whole new world of opportunity for me, because I didn't know much about it before. But then once I did, I thought, oh, I could go off in that, look at that direction. I have a partner, David Shaywitz, in my podcast, who's introduced me to a whole world of biotechnology and pharmaceutical related information that I really never paid attention to before. And I am grateful for that, because he opened my eyes to things that I find fascinating and I'm learning about, and can also grow from. So I think there's many places along my career I can point to moments and say, wow, that really mattered.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Lisa Suennen. She's the managing partner of Venture Valkyrie. We were just talking about steps in the process to bring more engagement for women in executive positions, particularly in venture capital. But one of the things I wanted to explore a little bit is the digital health space, which you've been deeply involved in, and that suffers the same problem. And yet, we don't. I don't feel like we're making progress. Sometimes I do, but gosh, one of the big conferences just not so long ago was just stacked full of men on the stage and barely any women. I seem to remember you actually pointing that out in one of the posts.
Sounds like me. Yeah, I mean, I don't think healthcare is particularly problematic with respect to women in leadership roles. I believe the numbers are 80% of all healthcare jobs are held by women, and 3% of the CEO jobs are held by women, which is, particularly poignant because women make something like, depending on who you believe, 75 to 85% of all healthcare decisions. Never have I seen it less than 75. So you'd think they'd want to understand, they being the companies, would want to understand their buying audience more intimately. But nevertheless, so what happens is a lot of these conferences is and I wrote about this on my blog actually this week, people invite to conferences who they know, and if the organizers are men, they invite men. I am told all the time, I would include women, but I don't know any in it. It's like, wow, have you been living inside for the last 30 years, really? I think a lot of times people want CEOs on the panels. Women aren't often the CEO yet, so you got to open your mind to other smart people. The CEO isn't always the best person to tell any story. It depends on the context. And also, I think women need to go, point out at these events that they should be heard. We at C-Sweetener, which is a not-for-profit I started with a colleague, Lisa Suennen, have just launched a women in healthcare speakers bureau, right now in the process of signing women up who want to be used for panels and speaking opportunities. And as soon as we get enough critical mass, we have, I think, 100 women now enrolled. We want to get a couple hundred, before we launch it to the public to use. People need to sign up. I was actually kind of disappointed that of all the people who indicated interest, women now, 600 people indicated interest, that we have only had 100 sign up so far. I wished it was, 600 or at least 300. So I think, again, everybody has to act. We can't all just talk about it and whine about it and point at it. Guys have to get serious about caring and acting. And if it takes a little extra work, do the extra work. Women have to care about acting, not complaining. They have to sign up and get involved and step forward and raise their hand. And it's a lot of work, but it needs to get done.
So going back to that, and I saw those stats. So, people expressed interest, but then didn't make the next step. Any thoughts on why that was the case? Do you have any insight based on any discussions that you've had?
Not really, not deeply. I think.
How do we push them to make that? Is it fear of this? For me, it feels a little bit like the public speaking. It's funny you mentioned that. I had somebody very similar. I was very introverted, shy kind of individual, and in some respects, I forced myself, and I agree with that. So some of it was mentoring, having the right supporting infrastructure, and part of me feels that if you're surrounded, if that's the environment that you're in and you don't have supporting infrastructure, it's very hard to put yourself out there because you don't feel like you've got the support. Even if they're not negative, they're not supportive. So do we need more mentors? Is there more of a requirement?
We do need more mentors. And that actually was the original purpose of C-Sweetener, was a mentor matching program for senior women in healthcare. So it's like a match.com to match senior level women with mentors, men and women mentors, by the way. Because I think if men don't get on board, it doesn't go anywhere. But I don't think that's the primary reason, because these were people who already expressed interest in this, in the speaking bureau. I think people are fundamentally, there's a big gap between talking and acting, right? And no matter what we do in the world, there's a big gap between talking and acting. And I think you got to make time. If you want to make a difference, you got to make time for it. And you can't just hope somebody else will make that happen for you.
Okay, so thinking about the health companies that you've been involved in, any standouts of folks that you've experienced, or even companies that you've experienced where you've just seen maybe not necessarily success from a corporate standpoint, but success from a leadership standpoint that stands out?
You mean with respect to women or with respect to just generally?
No, with women specifically.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a company, Evidation Health, for instance, which I recently was on the board of. I just recently came off the board, but boy, what a powerhouse company that is. And it's run by women, almost all women, actually. The board is half women. It is working in the real world evidence, to support clinical trials area and research. It is successful. They hit their numbers. They organize well. They just provide tremendous leadership, both in the industry and for the people that work there. So that's a great example. Another, Genome Medical is another company run by Lisa Alderson. It's a national telemedicine practice for genetic counseling, solving a real problem in the industry. This is her third startup. She was involved in several others. Her first time as the CEO. Just, really sharp, making things happen. Super impressed by that. Aetion, another one, Carolyn McGill, CEO there, a really interesting data play. There are many. I actually have been very fortunate in that because of the work I do around women's leadership, I get to meet a lot of these folks. And I am just so impressed. Sarah Iceland down at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, who leads innovation down there, just a super strong and smart but also empathetic leader. There are numerous people, so many actually.
So there are lots of great examples that we can point to that can be the light for people to follow. I mean, that certainly, as I look at my own career, I've found folks that I admire, respect, and maybe don't even know, but I follow their thoughts. And one of the things, from my perspective, that I think is helpful, and I know you do this. So to me, you're a model of this, and I don't know that I can point to others, but I think it would be good to do so. Do they write? Do they share their experiences and talk about it? Because that's great. They're doing this stuff, but how did they get there? What is their thought how can I learn from them? Because I want to emulate them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of communications and I love to write. And I know you do as well. I think that doesn't come easy to lots of people. But speaking can. So some people are better at communicating that way. But some of it's just one-on-one sharing or small group sharing, is finding ways to network in smaller settings where people can talk to each other. I think, we all go to so many conferences, and I wish we spent more time with small group networking instead of monster standing around a cocktail party, or sitting in panels where everybody's looking forward and not at each other. Because that's really, I think, where you meet lots of people and have the opportunity to share if you can just carve out some time. And, but it's hard. I mean, it's hard to, and I think women are not as natural sometimes at tooting their own horn and really talking about what they've accomplished. We're taught that it's tacky to brag about yourself, quote unquote. But of course, if you're humble and talking about your accomplishments, that's great. People love that and how their thought process works. So it's complicated, but I think with small gestures, we're getting there incrementally, as you would say.
Yeah, so I think that's good. So in amongst that, I would pull out the thread of, the small changes. So if you can write, if you can talk, go to these conferences. And I specifically like that idea of going to small events. Somebody mentioned to me, finding the local business groups to attend and participate in, to sort of, be part of that community and engage. Yeah. And it's not easy. I know that. I mean, not everybody's comfortable sort of walking up to blank strangers, and it takes a certain amount of gutsiness. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes, has been my experience. So
Yeah, when I was younger, I used to think how networking was such a pain and I didn't really like it. And it was hard to do because, like you said, walking up to strangers. I still thought, I don't think anybody would think of me as shy, but I often find it hard in a crowded room to get started in a conversation. But I think you got to just fight through it and do it. You really got to reach out and make connections and prioritize networking and prioritize finding the people that can help you grow. That's how it changes.
And I'd finish by saying, follow Lisa and read her blog and subscribe to her blog. She puts it out on a regular basis. I don't know how frequently, but I get it. I love it. I enjoy it. I would encourage you to do that. I think that's a great way to sort of start the process. It remains for me to thank you for joining me. It's been a great pleasure. It always is to catch up with you. Thanks for joining me on the show, Lisa, today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Nick. I always like talking to you.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at Dr. Nick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.